when you say overcharging, I don't know what that means. Can you explain to me when you say overcharging?
Yeah, so for example, in California, you could be charged with assault with a deadly weapon. And that could be charged as a misdemeanor or a felony. And it depends on your record, whether you have a criminal record, how the weapon was used, if there were injuries, things like that. So it's a judgment call by the DA because it's called a wobbler. It wobbles between being charged as a misdemeanor or a felony. What he does is he jacks up everything to be a felony. And then as the case matriculates through the system, the statistics are showing that they reduce it to a misdemeanor in order to get a plea bargain. And then they count that as a conviction. Okay. And what they're not tracing is, hey, it started as a felony, why are you reducing it? The only reason you reduce charges to get a plea is because your case fell apart, witnesses weren't available. I mean, something that goes to the gravity of the ability to prove the case. But if a witness recants and says it doesn't happen, like with Cisneros, look, the Republican Party was going after Cisneros for sexual harassment, and the victim recanted, and then instead of saying we were wrong, the Republican said, oh, well, we were going to pull that commercial anyway. The victim came forward and said that there was a misunderstanding with her and Gil Cisneros, and they pulled the commercials. And so my point is, it's time to be honest and transparent in this county. It's time to fight for minority communities. Okay, let me give you a quick example. The Victims March. There are victims who come to the Victims March who are victims of Anaheim police shootings.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is they come because they are victims and they show up because they have every right to be respected, that their kids or their family members were victims of a shooting by the police. And when they showed up at the Victims March, which is held at the courthouse in Orange County, right? It was held outside, and they came and protested. The DA moved it inside to keep those people out.
Wow.
And then they changed the rules to say you could only come to the Victims March by invitation.
Oh, wow.
That is so offensive.
Oh, wow.
I wrote Marcy's Law. I was one of the co-writers of the Victims' Bill of Rights in 2008. We didn't define a victim that whether the DA thinks you're a victim or you're not a victim. The victim is in the eye of the beholder. You decide if you believe you're a victim, and if you're a victim, you have every right to show up under the California Constitution.
All right,
Did I answer your question?
You answered my question. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Todd, I have a question. Based on your comments about overcharging, would it be fair to take your comments as a pledge that as county prosecutor, you will not use overcharging as a technique?
I am so offended and believe it's against the ethical duty of a prosecutor to charge anything that you either cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt or you do not believe is in the interest of justice.
And that includes not only charging one thing as higher level, but adding charges. In order
Yeah,
to
so
plead
one
down.
of the things that the DA does, they play a game. They add enhancements. Prior prison, like you can add a 1 year prior, 1 year added onto your sentence if you've been to prison before and did a time in prison. You can add 5 years if you've been to prison and haven't been free from custody for more than 5 years. They add those on just to get leverage in the case. Instead of just saying, this is our case and we're gonna prove it, and we're only gonna charge what we believe is in
And
the
you're-
interest of
And
justice.
you're not gonna use those techniques as.
I will absolutely not use those techniques, and more to the point, prosecutors today, and the way I was judged when I was a prosecutor, I forgot to tell you that, right? I was a prosecutor for over a decade, I've done thousands of cases, I've done 120 trials to verdict in this county. The prosecutors in the district attorney's office rated me the outstanding prosecutor in the office. Some of you know I volunteered for 10 years as a police officer in East Los Angeles, and I was a high school teacher at Roosevelt High School in East Los Angeles. My family business came from East LA, on Whittier Boulevard, just east of Atlantic. Yeah, all the homeboys over there. And so I come from Montebello, I come from that area, and let me tell you what's happening. Our county's grown up, my friends. We're more cosmopolitan. We have differentiation. We have widespread homogeneousness. That's a word. And we're not the Orange County, thank God, of yesteryear. Okay, Birch Street is not named after a tree. It's named after the Birch Society. Okay, this county has had racism and inequality, and it's been vested with people in power who have not understood that we have got to figure out how to lift everybody up at the same time.
Right,
So yes, the answer to the question.
So the answer is yes. So let me ask you this then. If it's discovered that you are, do you pledge to resign if it's discovered that you are?
Of course.
All right. Arlene. Because when you make commitments, that's the accountability piece. Yes, Arlie.
So Todd, thank you first for accepting our invitation to come
Of course.
and for everything that you've done for me personally. My question to you is, how will you handle domestic violence cases? It appears that Rackauckus and his team aren't really doing much to address domestic abuse.
So let me tell you about domestic violence. It's the number one call for service where police officers get hurt. And the reason is that when you go and people are fighting, you show up, and then when the cops come, the victim sometimes turns against the police, okay? Because that's what happens in marriages and families, but this is the problem. There are so many women who are enslaved in their relationships with men in a marriage or non-marriage but living together situation because kids are involved or whatever. And she relies on him because he's the breadwinner and she's raising the children or whatever, and so she becomes psychologically and financially dependent on him. And she doesn't know how to break away. It's called the battered woman syndrome. And what happens is things get so bad and escalate to the point where she finally kills him, and instead of being charged with murder, she should be given a trophy and award. Okay? And I'm serious. Just because.
So how many trophies will you award?
Depends on the situation. But my point is there has to be a recognition that just because you commit a crime against somebody, you have to take into consideration what led up to the crime. Right? Everything is not in a vacuum. There has to be a balance. And so I studied that. Battered women syndrome was a very early psychological analysis back when I was still in law school in the late 80s. But with respect to Arlene's question, this is the deal. You have to put those cases on even when the victim changes, and generally it's a woman, changes her story. You have to put that case on in front of a jury. And I'll tell you why. Because sometimes she needs the excuse that she did not want to move forward, but she couldn't help it because she got a subpoena and she had to testify. And then you have to offer protection for her. You can't just let her walk to the parking lot. You have to find housing for her. You have to give her protection. You have to be willing to move her and her family out of the area. You have to get stay-away orders, and you have to enforce those orders. So you have to do everything you can to break the cycle of violence. You can't just let women go back or have to fight on their own. And so many women find themselves in that situation. But I want to say one thing. Because it's important. Real quick. This district attorney will protect you the same way I just articulated about women for anybody irrespective of your sexual orientation. You will not be denigrated. You will not